Hello, my name's Jane and we're in the grounds here of the beautiful Bromwich Hall. But it's not this fantastic medieval building that I'm here to talk about today. The hall itself was the home of the Lords of the Manor of Bromwich in medieval times, but it's just the one survival of what would have been many manor buildings. The manor was of course the estate itself, and this building would have been the hall or the centre of that manor complex. There would have been lots of other buildings outside surrounding it and in the near area. So you might have had barns, you might have had forges and blacksmiths and mills and all sorts of buildings, outbuildings to the house. You might have had brewery, you might have had laundry, you might have had all sorts of buildings that would have assisted the running of this estate of Bromwich. We do have one building left, and this building has been the subject of much debate over the years, but archaeologists have had a look at it and they've had another look at it, and that's this building here. This building we call the Cottage, but it was the home of the managers when the house was a pub and restaurant, and it has been much altered over time. But experts have had a look, and in the roof space they have found what they believe to be a virtually intact 15th century roof. And further examinations makes them believe that this building was once a medieval bakery because of its original shape and size and the nature of its construction. It would have originally been a square building, although today it's oblong because an extra bay was added probably in the 16th or 17th century. So that's our one remaining medieval outbuilding, but this is incredibly unusual. There doesn't seem to be any other timber framed medieval bakeries left anywhere else in the country as far as we know. So that's quite an interesting survival. So we're hoping to be able to tell the story of this building a bit more in future. So what else would have been out there? So we've talked about what might have been round near the hall itself, the outbuildings. It would have been a complex of buildings and not just one building. But out there you can see today we've got more modern housing. We are kind of on the edge of West Bromwich here today, right on the border between Wednesbury and West Bromwich, and lots of people do think that Bromwich Hall is in Wednesbury, but it is actually just about in West Bromwich still. But outside you'll see the more modern housing, early 20th century housing, and of course the conurbation of the West Midlands comes right here. But of course that wouldn't have been the case if you'd come here in medieval times. So West Bromwich itself, or Bromwich, would have been a little bit further away near where the hospital is and All Saints Church down that main road. And between there and here there would have been lots of cottages and little settlements. Bromwich was never a little village like you might think of in the countryside today. It was a bit of a sprawling settlement, and it also included what was called ends, or little other settlements of several houses. So it was a bit spread out really, but you'd have also had lots of fields, and in medieval times they practiced the open field system, and that was where farmers had strips in a variety of fields, so that they got the best land and then they got some of the less best land. And also in medieval times you would leave one of your fields fallow or uncultivated each year to allow the nutrients to return to the soil. So each farmer would have some of his strips in his fields each year that were left uncultivated. So it would have been very different here in medieval times to what you see today. This would have been quite a rural area, although you would have had Wednesbury of course, and other towns nearby. So the water table here is rather high, and we have had several floods in the more modern part of the building, the 60s extension, which you can just see the edge of there coming outside the kitchen. That was built when the building became a pub and restaurant. However, the medieval parts don't flood because people knew that this was a problem. And also in the 60s, to be fair, there had been lots of mining in the area, and so they had to pump out the mines of the excess water, so the water table was actually a lot lower at the time. This has risen again in recent years. So underneath the building there are culverts which take away any excess water, but this also allows you to have a drainage system which will take any waste or anything unwanted away from your hall house and your manor, down the hill towards the poor people. This wall that you may have seen if you visited the site, that runs all the way around our present site, was built in the 1700s by Samuel Clark, who owned the building at the time. He was a merchant and retired here to West Bromwich and bought the lands here. The area at the front he terraced, and he grew lots of fruit, and he really enjoyed his gardening. If we then come forward to the 1800s and the early 1900s, when the building was occupied by a number of families, usually around 8 families lived in the building, and it was split up into different tenements, then we know from people we've spoken to that the area outside was split up into gardens or allotments, and the people that lived here, they had pigs and chickens, and they grew their own vegetables, and they used the space to feed their family. When we did some archaeology a few years ago, up this corner here, we found a Victorian toilet. As any toilets in the building were outside, even into the 20th century. There wasn't any electricity in the building or any inbuilt flushing toilets, so people had to go outside the toilets, which is why by the early 1950s it was decided that the building was no longer fit to be inhabited and the people were moved out. The building was eventually restored and became a pub and restaurant until the pub decided that it was no longer viable for them to run it, and it came into the guardianship of Sandwell Museum Service.